Hi, everyone. This is Lynn Crawford with Hope Dementia Support. And here it is the first of the year, and we have Joshua Pops, a local elder law attorney, here to talk to you about Medicaid. But first of all, Joshua, would you mind telling people a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Lynn, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Joshua Pops. I'm an estate planning and elder law attorney. My office is in Vancouver. I do a lot of practice in terms of estate planning administration, but my real bread and butter and what I care most about is Medicaid planning and long-term care planning. I've been giving this presentation for Hope for at least 7 years, maybe 8 or 9. I'm not sure how far we go back. I've always been a big fan of Hope. Uh, I'm especially a bigger fan since my mother recently passed away due to Alzheimer's, and my dad was a frequent attendee of Hope himself. And the number one thing I ask clients when they're coming in for long-term care planning and Alzheimer's or dementia is on the horizon, I always slip them a little flyer for Hope and I ask them if they've heard of Hope. What are you doing for you? So I do want to say, everyone who's on this presentation this year, good job doing something for you and going to Hope.
Perfect. The
There you
only
go.
the only thing that I would like to remind everybody
Yeah.
is that we will answer questions preferably at the end, but if you'll just put them in the chat or in the Q&A, we'll make sure that your questions are answered. And after that, I will just say, Joshua, it's all yours.
And as I said to Lynn before we opened everything up, I always enjoy the questions and answers as much as anything. And I told Lynn, it seems like every year I guarantee you someone asks a question and I have to say, that's an interesting question. I've never been asked that before and I have no idea what the answer is. So I'm always looking forward to finding out what that question is going to be this year, where I get to say, I have no clue. This presentation is about Medicaid, long-term care planning. I describe this program, the title of it is Qualifying for Medicaid in the Middle Ages. I call it that program because I always, like to tell the story. My mom had a job after she'd retired. Don't ask me how she stumbled into this. She got a job writing glossary definitions for a middle school history textbook. And she was behind and she called me and said, Josh, honey, I need your help. I need you to write me a definition for the Middle Ages in 125 words. And I said, "Gosh, I could write that in 10,000 words and I could write that in 10 words, but 125 words is kind of just enough to make it as confusing as possible." So that's why I call this presentation Qualifying for Medicaid in the Middle Ages. It's not a succinct 5-word explanation, and it's not the probably 9-hour presentation I could give if we really want to get in the weeds. It's just enough information for your head to spin and get confused. So I always tell clients and people who hear this presentation, this is just enough information for you to think, oh my gosh, what a program. So if you leave this feeling confused or gosh, I have no idea what's going on, or I wish I understood this more, you're probably on the right track and it will settle in and make sense.
So we have what feels like an urgent question, so I'm going
Oh,
to interrupt right from the beginning.
yeah.
And it says, is being a veteran make any difference with Medicare, Medicaid?
Yes, but we can get there
Okay,
at the end. Yeah.
okay.
So, nothing urgent enough to discuss now. So, qualifying for Medicaid in the Middle Ages, Medicaid, for a little background, I tell clients, is the program by which the government helps pay for your long-term care. The idea, and Medicaid as we know it, grew out of LBJ and the Great Society program. So if you think about it like that, it makes sense. Putting it to you bluntly, if you were on government housing, you had government subsidies for your food and your medicine and your housing. The government would also help pay for your old folks' home when you got old and sick and died as well. And of course, in 1965, we had no idea how long people would be living and the kind of conditions they could be living with for that amount of time. And as that program grew, Medicaid, which was originally really a low income program, became more important for people of lower class, middle class, even upper middle class. It's a very common program. And I say elder law, what I do for a living, grew out of estate planning attorneys who are having clients come to them with these long-term care concerns, and these elder law attorneys started exploring and developing more work with this long-term care Medicaid program. So the basic parameters of everything we discuss is still the same. If grandma is a little old lady and she's writing a check for her care each month, when grandma runs out of money, she'll have to chip in her income, but the government will pay the rest of that bill. That's the main idea of the program. So everything we're doing is dealing with the using the idea of we're using taxpayer dollars, we're paying for care using taxpayer dollars. So what are the limits and strictures, understanding that we're going to deal with when we're looking at long-term care? Now, when we're talking about long-term care, we're talking about people who need assistance with daily living. I have one slide up here. I tell clients I'm generally of the opinion, I hate to say it, if you're over the age of 75, you probably need assistance with daily living. Maybe there are some medical miracles. Um, Theoretically, if you want to care, have a caregiver or a social worker take a look at someone's care level, you could do that. Generally, if you're looking at long-term care Medicaid, you need assistance with daily living. So what we're really talking about is the financial qualification. If we talked about this as a program where if you're broke enough, the government will help chip in for your medical care, what does that mean? And so what I'm dealing with when clients come and talk to me is I'm asking them questions in a very specific way. And I sometimes gently, or I try and gently as possible, interrupt clients to make sure that they know I'm asking very specific questions. How much money do you make? How much do you make per month? What's the gross amount per month? What are your resources? What's your cash on hand? How do you hold these resources? Those sorts of questions are things I'm asking. Do you have a car? These sorts of questions. I'm asking them in a very specific way so I can get a specific financial picture to fit the parameters of what I'm going through here. There's a major difference. The big difference, more than anything, is for married people versus single people. The qualifications for married couples, there's a lot of very tricky, without getting too deep into it again, various things we can do for married couples to move around money, to preserve resources that we can't do for single people. There's a very big difference between people entering a skilled nursing facility versus 99% of my clients. And again, I do this for a living. If I've had one long-term care consultation, I've had 1,000 or more, probably thousands at this point, and I could count the number of skilled nursing facility consultations I've had on one hand. Especially for Alzheimer's and dementia, we're talking about the Community Options Program Entry System. We all call it COPES. That's in-home care with a caregiver, that's an adult family home, that's an assisted living facility. The things we're talking about for people with Alzheimer's or dementia. And we all deal with this frustration where Alzheimer's or dementia, it's not necessarily a skilled nursing thing because it's not a specific medical condition where you could say there's some sort of cure or treatment. It's just caring for your loved one as they are unable to care for themselves. So we're generally dealing with that COPES program, in-home care, adult family homes, assisted living facilities. Income is not a major issue. Income qualification is not a big deal in the state of Washington. I know I'll have good news for a client when someone makes an appointment and the notes my paralegal provides me is they want to talk about Medicaid, but they're concerned because they make too much money each month. I don't know if anyone has, if you've done any research, first of all, forget everything you've heard because the internet's a confusing place for Medicaid. But Washington is a spend down state. There really is not a big concern for income. If you make less than $13,542 a month, you qualify income-wise for an adult family home or an assisted living facility. And if you make more than $13,542 a month, you probably don't need Medicaid anyhow. So again, even if you have a few grand, and we'll get into how these things are assigned and what kind of participation payment you have, but you can still qualify for Medicaid if you make a few grand a month and your loved one, if you have a loved one who makes a few grand a month and their care is more than that, you can still qualify for long-term care Medicaid. Getting in the door income-wise is a simple thing. When it becomes more of an issue is for married couples. We are looking at the name on the check rule. When I said your income has to be, 13 grand or less, when I'm looking at income for a married couple, I'm looking at the income of the institutionalized or ill spouse. Generally, I'm going to use two terms. I'm going to talk about the community spouse or the well spouse. That's those of you who are going to hope caring for a loved one, a spouse. And the ill spouse or the institutionalized spouse is your spouse who has Alzheimer's or dementia, and you have to put into a facility. I'm only looking, and when I'm asking married couples about income, I often say, I have to kind of gently interrupt and say, hold on, let me get your income and their income. And that's for this reason is that the name on the check rule matters. I'm only looking at the income of the ill spouse. That's the only thing I'm looking at because of what's known as the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance. If the income of the community spouse, that's the person out, in the world, is less than $2,465, they may keep some of the income of the institutionalized spouse to bring their income up to that amount. And if you have a mortgage, utilities, that can we can increase that up to even $4,000. Now, what does that constructively mean? Let me give you an example. The prototypical example. I still have a few of these of we had one spouse who was the breadwinner and the other spouse was a homemaker, never really worked. The only income they have is a social security check of $900 a month. Obviously, they can't live on $900 a month. So I'm looking at income, figuring out if this, let's use that example. This person only makes $900 a month. They can keep at least $1,500 of their spouse's income each month to get them up to that $2,500 limit. A person on Medicaid has to contribute their income over that amount towards the cost of their care. So for single people and for married people with large amounts of income, they are writing a check each month for their care and they get to keep $105.78 as a personal needs allowance. When my mom first started getting sick, I spent that money on People magazine and Milano cookies. Eventually, between you and I, my mom wasn't able to really eat cookies as much or read People magazine. So I just wrote a check for $105 and we considered that my mom's, uh, fee for getting her nails done and getting her hair done. So the way it works is again, that spouse in the community can keep some income of the ill spouse, but the ill spouse is going to have to contribute the rest of their income. Often informally, clients will say, I heard, especially for a single person, you're writing a check for your care. If you have a spouse, you can keep some for the ill spouse. But again, right here, if you can see that cursor, so clients often say if they were talking about a single person of, I heard they're going to take all of grandma's money. What that really substantively means is they will send you a letter letting you know how much of a check you have to write each month for your care, and grandma will get to keep $105.78. My mom was on Medicaid. She was widowed once she got on, she was widowed before she got on Medicaid. So every year I would get a letter from the state saying your participation payment has changed. The amount you have to contribute each month is. And based on their calculations, I'd write that check. The state would cover the rest of my mom's bill, and mom got to keep $105.78. Try not to spend it all in one place. Whoops. Financial qualifications, resources is what I'm doing. How do we move money around? How much money are you allowed to keep and still be on Medicaid? A single person is allowed to keep $2,000 in non-exempt resources. That's it. Again, let's remember the program. If you're broke and you've run out of money and you need to stay in an old folks home, the government will chip in and pay for that bill because you don't have the money to do so. That's the framework. Non-exempt resources. And we'll get to what exempt resources are. But for single people, that's it. 2 grand. Here is a big part of my day is talking about the community spousal resource allowance. And I'll focus on if you're married and you're requesting care in home, in an adult family home or an assisted living facility, husband and wife combined can have up to $72,525 in non-exempt resources, at the time you qualify. That means everything. One of the other things, again, my attempt to gently, keyword there, gently attempt to gently correct clients is I will sometimes have clients come in and I'll say, tell me about your resources. And they'll say, well, I have XYZ amount of dollars and he has XYZ. And I gently tell the client, just so you know, for Medicaid, his is yours and yours is his. If you're married, if you're legally separated, all resources combined count. Now, this is a snapshot approach, meaning the state takes a snapshot. At the time you apply, when you're applying, in order to qualify, you have to be at or below $72,529 once. Everything the two of you have combined together counts. But what happens to the community spouse afterwards doesn't matter. The way I describe it to a client is we have to figure out a way for you and your spouse to get under $72,529 combined. However, if you, the well spouse, buy a lottery ticket and win the lottery the next day, your spouse stays on Medicaid. Think of it as a limbo contest. You have to get broke, but you don't have to stay broke. Medicaid is a one-time qualification for married couples. So if you win the lottery the day after your spouse qualifies, it doesn't matter. So everything I'm doing in a Medicaid consultation is finding out how much money people have and saying, okay, now what are we going to do to get you combined at or below $72,529? And we know we won't have to worry about what happens afterward. A lot of what I'm doing is how much do you have? Where are you now? How do we get to that lower number? That's a big chunk of my day. Now, there are major resource exemptions. The house is always exempt. You will never be thrown out of the house. I repeat, the state is not in the business of tossing people out of their homes. They're not going to leave you out on the street. The house is always exempt. You will always be able to stay in the home. No matter what happens, you can stay in the home the rest of your life. One car is always exempt. Not 10, but one. And it doesn't matter what kind of car. It could be a 40-year-old truck, or it could be a Ford F-350 or a Mercedes-Benz. It could be anything. It could be a Rolls-Royce Phantom 2 if that's how you drive to go see your loved one. Household furnishings and personal effects. I don't need to know how much your, couch costs or how much your TV costs. Those sort of things don't matter. Prepaid burial or cremation plans. If you haven't prepaid for a burial or cremation plan, prepay for one. Make sure they know you're applying for Medicaid because there's special rules around it. One of the things, for example, I learned because of that question is veterans benefits. As an example, is you can be buried for free as a veteran at Willamette National Cemetery, but you still got to pay to get there. After my dad passed away, I wrote a check for $5,500 at the funeral home because even though he's a veteran and he was buried for free at Willamette National, as I say, you can't drive up with your deceased veteran in the back seat and say, "Hey, I got a corpse here. Where do you want me to drop him off?" It still costs money to get your loved one to that free burial or to get them to that cremation facility. So prepay for that because that's exempt. Life insurance with no cash value. So if you still happen to have term life insurance, that's not a cash value. And what's known as a Medicaid compliant annuity. An annuity that does not have a cash surrender value. It is not assignable with a payout period not longer than the life expectancy, and the state is named as a contingent beneficiary. That's what I call a Medicaid compliant annuity, also known as a single premium immediate annuity. And you're probably saying, what the heck is that? Here's how this works. And I use these all the time. Let's pretend we're ready to qualify for Medicaid. We found an adult family home or we've been in an assisted living facility for a while. We have a married couple. The key word is here, this works for married couples. Let's pretend husband and wife come in. They're ready to qualify for Medicaid. Their mortgage is paid off. Their car is paid off. No major debts. They qualify for Medicaid, except for the fact that they have $500,000 instead of $72,000. In fact, for nice round numbers, let's pretend they say, we're ready to qualify. The facility says they'll accept us, but we have $572,000. What do we do? Well, looking back through the slides we just went through, and again, this is tricky stuff. We know a few things for Medicaid. We know for a married couple, only the income of the institutionalized spouse matters. We know there's a snapshot approach. You only have to get broke once. And we know what happens to the well spouse afterwards, money wise, doesn't matter. So I have a husband and wife. Husband's in the facility. What's wife going to do? With this $500,000, the wife can purchase a Medicaid compliant annuity. So here's how it works. We've got $572,000, which really means we've got 500 grand burning a hole in our pocket, and we don't want to write a check for 8 to 12 grand each month waiting for our loved one to pass away. So we could write a check. We could purchase a Medicaid compliant annuity. And when I say purchase, that's what I mean. You're writing a check for 500 grand and that money's gone. So congratulations, you've just gone from 572,000 to $72,000. Congratulations, you're broke. After this, now that you qualify, the well spouse, the spouse out in the community, is getting a check each month. We're usually drafting them over a 5-year period. So this $500,000, they're getting it back as a check each month in their name only. We have husband and wife at $572,000. We need to get them to $72,000. And the income of, let's say, the wife doesn't matter afterwards because she's out in the community. She writes a check for $500,000. She's broke. She now gets that $500,000 back over a 5-year period. Here's why there's no such thing as the perfect crime. A few things. This is a loophole, and the state knows it's a loophole. So the state has to be named as the beneficiary. So if wife passes away right after this annuity starts, the state gets all that money back. An example of when I always get concerned about Medicaid compliant annuities is I have a little old lady who's in relative good health. And isn't it always like this? It seems like I have a little old lady who's 5'1" and 100 pounds soaking wet. She's been caring for her husband at home for the last 3 years, and I say, how big is your husband? And the answer without fail is, oh, he's 6'2", 260 pounds. I worry that this person's going to make it 5 years. I level with you. I'm no doctor and I'm not giving, medical advice, but that's always a concern. The other thing with a Medicaid compliant annuity is the shortest amount of time they can run for is 5 years. So if your loved one passes away the next month, there's no givebacks. And that $500,000, you're going to be waiting 5 years to get it. These are very complicated things to write. I generally prefer to use a annuity broker out of Seattle who specializes in these financial instruments. It's something always on the table. I'm doing a lot of talk about Medicaid compliant annuities for married couples. And when I'm talking about this Medicaid compliant annuity planning, what I always describe it's often a tool that I use. And the metaphor I use when it comes up often is I tell clients that long-term care planning is kind of like the world's most morbid horse race. And I tell clients in this morbid horse race analogy, I'm not someone who can help you throw the race. I'm just kind of the bookie. And based on how many times I've seen these races run and the kind of horses I see, I have to ask clients, here are the different horses you could put your money on. Now, how lucky do you feel? And sometimes we put our money on that Medicaid compliant annuity horse. And sometimes if we don't think someone has very long to live, again, none of us being doctors, to continue the morbid horse race analogy, rather than moving this money around, we let it ride and we write a check until the loved one passes away. Now, again, this is as complicated and complex, I hope, as anything we're going to discuss tonight, but that is something I'm discussing all the time. If you have a home, you'll never be thrown out of the home. If you have too much money and you're married, there are always things we can do to move money around. At the same time, people sometimes want to come and talk to me about Medicaid compliant annuities and moving money around. And I sometimes have to break that news to the client. I always try and break it gently. I think you have too much money to worry about Medicaid. I have had Medicaid compliant annuities drafted in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. But speaking bluntly, I don't think anyone would be so irrational, again, easy for me to say, as to draft a Medicaid compliant annuity for $1 million, $2 million. I sometimes have to tell clients, I think you're too rich for Medicaid, and I think you're going to be writing a check until your loved one passes away. For those people in between, we have Medicaid compliant annuities. Now, one of the things that often comes up and people have a zillion questions about is this 5 year look back. What does this mean? What's this? I've heard about this 5 year thing. Some people have a 3 year thing. What is this penalty? And the basic idea, if you think about it again, is this. You're going to be using taxpayer dollars to pay for your loved one's care. So the government has closed the loophole of if you have grandma as a single person who has her house and $500,000, you can't just give yourself a check for 500 grand and say, okay, grandma's broke. I'm ready for government benefits. They've closed that loophole. So again, the government looks back over a 5 year period and asks, have you given anything away in the last 5 years? If you've given anything away, you're ineligible for a certain amount of time. Husband and wife can give things between themselves. That's why we're allowed to do this Medicaid compliant annuity. We're transferring money back and forth. And there's other things we're doing, again, without getting too deep into the weeds. But giving money away is not something we're doing. There are exceptions to these transfer penalties, but generally, if you give more than $466 as a magic number in any 1 month period away, you're going to be ineligible. This is a transfer penalty. It's not a spending money penalty. So I tell clients, people who are on Medicaid can blow their money on themselves any way they want. If you have, again, I'll use grandma. Grandma is going to be going into a home and grandma wants one last hurrah in Vegas. Grandma can spend her money to fly first class and she can stay in the presidential suite and she can drink Dom Perignon at dinner every night, but she can't pay for your ticket and coach. She can't pay for your room at the motel off the strip, and she can't pay for your steak dinner. She can spend her money on herself any way she wants, but she can't give you anything. She can't write you that check. Paying for something for less than fair market value is also a gift. So if you're buying grandma's house and grandma's house is worth 500 grand and she sells it to you for $1, that's a transfer penalty. This often happens when clients say to me, I don't know what to do. My grandma gave me $10,000, 2 years ago because she felt bad and wanted me to have it. What do I do? And I tell clients, do you have the $10,000? And they say, yeah, I've got it sitting in an account. Then you move the money back. There's no such thing as an attempted, transfer. If you return the money back, it's not a problem. But it just means that if you're looking at Medicaid down the road, it's not the time to start giving money away. People often bring up because they've heard about this IRS thing. Well, I've heard you can give $19,000 away without any consequences. That's for tax purposes. That's not for Medicaid purposes. If you write people checks for 19 grand, you're going to trigger a transfer penalty. Now, occasionally it comes up, and I will say occasionally, but just an example of there's no such thing as the perfect crime. Well, grandma gave me money 4 years ago and I spent it all, but what are they going to do? There's no money to give back. What are they going to do? Kick her off Medicaid? And the answer is no. They might give grandma a hardship exemption, and then they might have Adult Protective Services give you a call. Because if you've taken money from someone who is now on government benefits and doesn't have the ability to manage their own financial affairs, and you've kept that money, the state can consider that a good reason to investigate elder financial abuse. Don't give money away if you think you don't have 5 years worth of money. Now that brings up another question. What can we do for single people? This is another one of those morbid horse race calculations. Let's pretend someone comes to me and says, we just placed grandma in a home yesterday. Are we just going to have to write a check until she's broke? And that's when we look at this 5 year look back period, because any money you've given away more than 5 years before you apply for Medicaid doesn't count. Now, this is another tricky one. This is the morbid horse race analogy. Sometimes this horse is on the table. But we're running these I call it guesstimating to the penny. We're trying to figure out in the next 5 years, based on grandma's care, based on the increase of care costs, based on her cost of living adjustment for her Social Security and maybe her pension, How much money is grandma going to need over the next 5 years? Let's say her income is 6,000 and the adult family home is 10,000. That's $4,000 a month. And if we multiplied that by 60 months and put a little extra wiggle room in, we have a vague idea how much money we think grandma will need for the next 5 years to pay for her care. And let's say we look at grandma's money. Maybe we have a financial advisor to help us, which is always nice. We've determined that grandma's going to need 400 grand over the next 5 years. And grandma has $600,000 to her name. Well, that's easy. We take that $200,000, we take it off the top, we make sure we've consulted an accountant to make sure there's no adverse tax consequences. We take this 200 grand, leave it sitting there. Grandma spends her money down over the next 5 years. It's a 5 year look back period. And 5 years and a day after we gave that money, we're okay for Medicaid. For single persons, occasionally for married couples, but usually more for single people, we're looking at these gifting strategies of we know you have to use your own money for 5 years. And by the way, you have to use your own money. So we're going to leave 5 years worth of money in grandma's name and figure out if there's anything off the top. So common strategies, I'm looking at Medicaid compliant annuities for married couples. And for single people, if they have more than 5 years worth of money, I'm looking at some rough guesstimating to the penny gifting program. Occasionally. If you have more than 5 years, we're talking about a gift. Um, and we'll get into some other transfer penalty exemptions later, but that's the gist of it. So, anything over 5 years ago, regardless of the amount, the total of all gifts in a month, does not exceed the daily nursing rate, which is $462. What that means is grandma can take everyone out to dinner. She can write the grandkids a check for $200 for their birthday. She can give a little bit of money each month. You just can't give away large amounts. This is a tricky one, and it comes up a lot. The transfer of the home to a spouse, disabled child, or a child, so you can transfer to a well spouse, child who has lived in the home for 2 years, who has provided verifiable care. This works if someone is going to be a paid caregiver for in-home care Medicaid. If there's a family member, a child, it has to be a child, not a grandchild or a niece or nephew. If a child moved into the home, they've been caring for mom for the last 2 years, and they're going to be the one as the paid caregiver because they're going to work to keep mom in the home, the state will allow you to transfer the house to you as a gift. But can't transfer mom to an adult family home or an assisted living facility. The other exemption, and this is tricky to prove that a transfer is not to qualify for Medicaid or to avoid a state recovery. What's an example of this? Giving to charity, giving to the church. I have an example. I had to argue this pretty strenuously, but we passed recently. I had a client before his wife had her massive stroke. He didn't always have the best relationship with his kids. After one of his kids got married, he said, I'm going to help pay for the wedding, and I want to pay to take all you kids on a cruise. And I was able to prove the transfer wasn't to qualify for Medicaid or avoid a state recovery because I said, wife didn't have this massive stroke yet. We all thought we were doing fine. We paid for this cruise. It wasn't like we gave everyone, blank checks. We wrote the check. It was literally, I showed on the credit card statement direct payments for airplane tickets directly and for that Carnival Cruise Line directly. And the state fought me a little bit, but after a little while of saying, come on, he paid directly, he didn't give them cash. I can prove he paid for the cruise. The state said, okay, that was not a gift to qualify for Medicaid. But prepare for even little things like that for them to give brushback. As I said, my mom was on Medicaid, and me being an only child and my parents obsessing over me, my parents insisted in early 2017 to write me a check for 10 grand so I could make the deposit to put an ad in the Columbian. For those of you who read the Columbian, I'm sure you've seen my ad 3 to 4 days a week. I'm still in there almost 10 years later. My parents gave me that 10 grand. And when I was getting ready to apply for Medicaid and it looked like mom was going to keep living, what did I do? I wrote a check for 10 grand and I put it back in mom's account. And for those of you who read the Columbian a lot, finally in the fall, I did get an updated photo. I'd had the same old photo for forever. I'm going to be more proactive about updating the photo. Right now, I have short hair in the Columbian. As you see, I'm growing the hair out. I'm debating whether to update the ad to reflect my hair. I don't know how long it will be. So we've talked about a few things. We've talked about qualifying for Medicaid, being broke enough, and how we move money around to qualify. We've talked about the penalties, that you can't just magically give money away. There's exceptions, there's strictures, there's parameters on how we move this money around. And the other thing people have heard about is estate recovery. The state can recover against the state can recover against the estate of someone on Medicaid. What does this mean? 99 times out of 100 it means this. If someone goes into an assisted living facility or an adult family home, they do not have to sell the home. The home is an exempt resource. But the moment before they pass away, the state will put something on that home so that they have a right to recover against the proceeds from the sale. So there's two ways this comes up. For married couples, we can transfer everything to the well spouse. I do this all the time. I literally did this at 2 o'clock today. This was my 2 o'clock. The home was owned by husband and wife. We have a husband who's gone into an adult family home. I drafted a deed transferring the house to the wife. This way, when her husband passes away, the house will be in her name only. He doesn't own a home. There's nothing in his estate, and the state cannot recover against this wife who did not receive any care. I did that at 2 o'clock. I drafted a deed where wife transferred the house. She transferred her husband's interest to her. You do that with a power of attorney, by the way. Heaven forbid someone has to deal with a guardianship. I've assisted, I don't do guardianships anymore, but I've assisted guardianship attorneys with the way to do this to qualify for Medicaid, of transferring the house to the well spouse. That way, I tell clients, if you're married and we do it right, you'll never be thrown out of the house and you'll be able to pass it along to the kids, no matter what. If you are unmarried, a lien will attach to your home. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here about, of course, there's always exceptions to this, but generally, the best thing to do is to sell the home rather than let the state attach. Um, the way I would describe how we talk about a home for single persons is on the second day of law school. I remember my professor in one of our classes, torts like personal injuries and things like that, said ignorance is never an excuse except for when it is. So I would tell clients keeping the house and letting a lien attach is never a good idea except for when it is. Usually, though, if we have grandma going into an adult family home and she doesn't have much cash on hand and we have the house, usually the best thing to do is sell the house, put a pile of money in the bank account, and then we begin the real world's most morbid horse race, which is we see what goes first, grandma or the money. That's the Medicaid lien. Now, just so everyone knows, I'm advising clients if you're a married couple and you own property, do not look to the Oregon side for an adult family home or an assisted living facility, because Oregon is the only state in the country that has a current court ruling that they can recover against the estate of the well spouse, meaning in Oregon, you're screwed either way. So just generally, if you're looking at adult family homes on the Oregon side for your loved one and you're married, don't for now, is what I advise. And one of the things, by the way, one of the transfer penalty exemptions I have been meaning to add here, and I meant to do it before I got on here today, so I apologize in advance. I'll add it for next year. There is a transfer penalty exception. You can transfer an exempt asset besides the house. What does that mean? Well, as I told you before, a car that you use to visit your loved one or transport your loved one to doctor appointments, things like that, is always exempt. After you're on Medicaid, you can transfer that exempt vehicle. I often tell clients for single persons, if they don't have a house and they've got a little bit of cash, is I can't help you magically preserve any of that money, but I can get you a new car. So let me explain, because I've been using this way more lately, the vehicle exemption. Grandma's in an adult family home. Grandma's writing a check each month towards the cost of her care. Grandma's got 75 grand in the bank. We can purchase, this is completely allowable, as weird as it sounds. Using a power of attorney, we can go to the Ford dealership, and grandma may be 5'1" and 105 pounds soaking wet. We could buy grandma a 25-foot long Ford F-350 with an extra cab, with a back seat, with every bell, with all the bells and whistles you can imagine, literally the nicest giant truck you can imagine. We could purchase this car with title in grandma's name, with insurance in the grandkids' name. Grandma's allowed to keep this vehicle as an exempt resource and get on Medicaid. And then the day after grandma gets on Medicaid, you can transfer that Ford F-350 to yourself. You could drive it, you could sell it and split the money, you can do whatever you like. I have clients who have grandmas who haven't driven in years, and they're buying cars in grandma's name, Cybertrucks, Ford F-350s, anything, and transferring it to themselves afterwards. Again, as weird as it sounds, you can get a new car as a transfer penalty exemption, as weird as that is. So, for COPES, which is what we're dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia, when are you applying for Medicaid? Your Medicaid benefits kick in the date you're approved, not the date you apply. Sometimes applications take 45 to 60 days. What this means is don't apply for Medicaid when you're at or below $2,000. Apply 45 to 60 days before you'll be at or below. And I have had this happen, I'd say about once a year. I'll level with you, a case from hell. And there's nothing a lawyer can do because there's no remedy in the Washington Administrative Code to prevent this problem. If a case drags on because of a complicated financial picture, and you are out of money because the application takes 5 or 6 months instead of 1 or 2, you're hanging on for dear life. What are people doing in that situation? They're either paying out of pocket or they're begging and pleading for the adult family home not to toss their grandmother out and saying, please, the application will be ready any day now. As an example, I had a client, maybe there was a method to his madness at one point. But when you're applying for Medicaid, the state has an asset verification system. If they have a ping because money was moved around or there was a large check written, they can say, hey, I need you to provide verification of that so I know you weren't giving money away. And I had a client, boy, there might have been a method to his madness at one point, but he moved money around from so many different accounts to so many other accounts for no good reason and wrote so many checks for random reasons and purposes that it took us 6 months for the application to get approved. And it was one of those we were, I describe it to a friend who doesn't do Medicaid. She said, God, that application sounds stressful. And I said to her, it's like an action movie where you're trying to disarm a bomb before it turns to zero, like trying to get this application approved before the adult family home threw this woman out for non-payment because we'd ran out of money 3 months ago and the Medicaid application wasn't approved. I feel like I have one of those a year. So timing an application is very good. If you know you have a case where there's going to be a mound of paperwork to prove, you might want to apply even a little earlier. I have plenty of applications where they're approved 45 to 60 days, but I've had, again, about maybe one a year, maybe two, where there's just so much money moved around, so many accounts, so much information for the state to verify that it's taking 3 to 6 months. So don't come see an attorney when you're broke and say, I'm broke. Now what do I do about Medicaid? Have a plan, consult with someone in advance, come up with a plan of attack so you can make your landing as easy as possible. And now this is an unwritten rule. It's about private pay. So I've just gone through all the things that the state requires for you to qualify for Medicaid. You have to be at or below certain amounts of money. $2,000 if you're single, 72,000 if you're married, the house, all that stuff. That's unrelated to an adult family home or an assisted living facility's private pay period. The idea is this. Once you're on Medicaid, you're writing a check for income for the cost of your care. The rest of that, bill is being paid for by the state. And people on Medicaid, to use the phrase as bluntly as possible about our loved ones, they're loss leaders for these places. If someone's going to be on Medicaid for a while, going to live on Medicaid for a while, the facility might be losing money on them because of what the state provides. So they require a period of private pay, meaning if you find a great adult family home for grandma and she has $5,000 to her name and they say, great, we'd love to have you. We require 6 months of private pay at $8,000 a month. That's not the place for you. Most reputable assisted living facilities and memory care facilities require a 2-year private pay period. Adult family homes, it depends on the adult family home, and it depends on how many cars they've got to get off the lot that month. Some adult family homes are 1 year or 2 years. Some of them are, we just had someone pass away, and for you, we could make an exception sort of thing. So if you're looking at we're looking at two things. We're looking at the private pay qualifications and the state qualifications. So it's not just about how much money will you have, it's where's your loved one going to be. If you're on Medicaid at home already, transferring in home to an adult family home or, an assisted living facility, it's allowable, but it can be tricky. I generally advise if you have a loved one at home and you're having trouble caring for them, maybe it's time to start looking at the place they're going to eventually end up at now. And again, I often advise of course, there's no right place for every person that's the same. There are placement advisors out there. I've got a stack of cards of all sorts of different people. Don't try and find that needle in a haystack yourself. Hire someone to help you find a place. When my parents needed a place, I didn't look myself. I called a placement advisor. When I needed a place for dad's hospice, I didn't look myself. I hired a placement advisor. And when I had to find an adult family home for my mom, I didn't look myself. I hired a placement advisor. This is something I've added for this year because I was trying to figure out something alliterative and useful. And I always tell clients, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I'm a lawyer. So this is not formal legal advice. These are just things that I tend to find come up almost always often. Again, that I'm not a therapist or a doctor. But I've added 3 pops as platitudes for this year because these are things that I find myself repeating on an almost daily basis. The first platitude, what I tell people is the more assistance you need, the less you need assisted living. What does that mean? For Alzheimer's and dementia, an adult family home is where you should be. My dad ended up at my dad ended up in assisted living because he was 88 when he passed, and it was perfect for him. He needed help washing the dishes and doing his toenails and getting things cleaned up, but it wasn't a big deal. He could just wait, or on his way back from the dining hall, he could stop one of the, workers there and say, "Hey, when you get a chance, swing by my apartment." Basic stuff. That's not ideal for people with Alzheimer's and dementia. They need to be changed, they need to be clothed, they need to be dressed, they need assistance feeding. They need assistance when they need it, not when it's convenient. Generally, assisted living facilities just can't provide that level of care. For adult family homes, you get more bang for your buck. And I also believe a lot of people say, well, they have Alzheimer's and dementia. Shouldn't I get them in memory care? Again, the more assistance you need, memory care is an offshoot of assisted living. The only difference for my purposes, in my opinion, again, and these are platitudes, this isn't legal advice, these are subjective opinions and platitudes. Memory care means they can lock the doors. So again, putting it as bluntly as possible, if you have a loved one who's constantly opening doors, and is constantly attempting to go places or go home, and you have to stop them, you're stuck with memory care. Memory care is expensive. There's only one place in town that has a year of private pay. So if you have someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, unless they are constantly opening doors and attempting to escape runners, I recommend adult family homes. Again, my personal experience. Pops' platitude. I was proud of the alliteration there. I had to brainstorm something alliterative. Number 2, if you think you need to place your loved one tomorrow, you probably should have placed them yesterday. I believe human nature, is, it's in our nature to provide care for loved ones past our ability to do so. And I tell clients going down with the ship isn't proving that you care. Keeping a loved one at home, providing substandard care isn't the way you prove that you care for someone. Getting them placed, getting them the care they need and deserve is how you prove you care. Um, I'm very good at giving these platitudes and advice. I wasn't good at following this advice. I kept my parents together in assisted living for longer than I should have. And I didn't move my mom. The assisted living facility basically called me up and said, your mom's falling too much. We need you to move your mom. And I was prepared for a cataclysm separating mom and dad because I thought, well, other people separate their parents and need to place them at different levels, but not mine, not me, not mom and pop. And I finally we had to move mom, and we found an adult family home, and I kept dad in assisted living. And my mom had such a great level of care. The caregivers at her adult family home were a saint, and dad was doing so much better on his own, not sitting there helplessly going down with the ship, watching mom, descend into this Alzheimer's haze, and he was dead in a little over 6 months. That's just my personal experience. Dad was 88. He wasn't 78 or 68. 88's a good run. That's a long time. But when I want to beat myself up, I say to myself, if I'd separated mom and dad earlier, if I'd gotten mom in a different level of care, if I'd known better than to just let me and dad go down with the ship, maybe pop would have made it longer. That's why that's one of my platitudes. This is a trickier one. Pops' platitude number three: honesty is not necessarily the best policy. I tell clients, if a client comes to me and I say, let me ask you, and they say, well, grandma doesn't want to go into a home. And I say, let me ask you, what's grandma's capacity like? Like, does she know where she is all the time? Does she know who you are? And they say, well, she has good days and bad days. I tell clients again, I'm not a doctor, or a neurologist. They have their good days. To me, that's fool's gold. Doing this for a living, I tell clients, based on, the worst day your loved one has had, that's where their capacity, that's where their level of understanding where they are is at. A lot of clients early in the Alzheimer's and dementia journey, especially before they get to hope, have this, of course, problem where they sit down with their loved one and they have the come to Jesus moment with them and this big conversation about maybe moving them or bringing them a caregiver. And then they realize the next night that they're having that same conversation over again. That's because your loved one with Alzheimer's and dementia doesn't have the capacity to understand the truth or what's going on. What does that mean for Medicaid purposes and placement? I tell clients, the phrase I use, by the way, I stole from my mom's hairdresser. When I called my mom's hairdresser and said, Ma's not going to be going to you to get her hair done anymore, Katie. She's, they have a place in assisted living where they'll, take you to get your hair cut. And Katie said, I thought this was coming. Her world's been getting smaller. People with Alzheimer's and dementia, their world is a lot smaller than you think. There's the level of capacity, and you can't place someone with capacity against their will. You can't push mom out the door and then run away and say, she's your problem now. Thank you very much. You have to place someone, you can't place someone against their consent. But again, the consent, the capacity of someone with Alzheimer's and dementia is a shifting thing. What I always tell clients is the good days and bad days thing is, and adult family homes are capable of dealing with this, is you drop grandma off, you pick grandma up, and grandma says, you're not taking me to an adult family home, are you? And you say, of course not, grandma. We're going to go out for ice cream. Oh, did I say go out for ice cream? I meant toward this adult family home. Oh, look, they have your favorite flavor of ice cream right here. Why don't you sit down and have a bowl? And grandma's been at this adult family home 6 months, and you've sold her house, and you're spending the proceeds down on her care. And you go to visit grandma, and every other time, not always every time, but every other time, grandma says, you say, how are you doing here, grandma? And she says, oh, it's nice here. I like it. They have my favorite flavor of ice cream, but I'd really like to go home now. When can I go home? And the answer is soon, grandma. We're working on it. With people with Alzheimer's and dementia, 99 times out of 100, I tell clients, if you're coming to see me to talk about your loved one who needs care, don't bring them. They probably can't understand what we're discussing. And the best thing isn't for them to understand. It's for you to understand, and then for you to decide, knowing your loved one, how much to tell them, if anything. Telling someone with Alzheimer's dementia everything It might confuse or frustrate them. They might hang on to parts that don't matter anymore. You know how it is. They get hung up on stuff. My platitudes. Look for an adult family home if you really need assistance. Place them earlier than you think so you don't go down with the ship. And once you realize you're doing what you need to do and telling them what they need to hear, it'll become easier for you. That's not legal advice. That's not medical advice. It's just my subjective opinion, having done this a zillion times over the last few years. And again, I've got 19 years to go before the mortgage is paid off, so I'll be probably answering these questions the next zillion few years. It is 7:26. My presentation's supposed to go about an hour, and I always like to make sure we get questions answered. Um, Hopefully, again, I'll get one of these questions of, oh gosh, I have no idea what the answer is. But the first question I'm looking at here is does being a veteran make any difference with Medicare and Medicaid? Being a veteran does sometimes make a difference if you're going to be going into an adult family home. Or, sorry, adult family home, assisted living facility. I apologize. So let me explain. Assisted living facilities, as I briefly said, require often at least 2 years of paying out of pocket. So you're paying out of your income. There's a program if your loved one served in the armed forces during a specific combat period. It doesn't matter what they did, it matters when they did it. If they served in a combat period, they may qualify for aid and attendance. What that means is if you apply for aid and attendance through the VA, and there's companies that help you do this, they may give you an income stream to help you pay for the cost of that adult family home, thus, offsetting some costs during that 2 year period. It really only works the aid and attendance in that period for a couple reasons. And the main reason is qualifying for aid and attendance takes about 10 months to get those benefits. If you're broke and you're looking for Medicaid tomorrow, you're not worried about income you might get 10 months from now because you need to qualify now. Qualifying for aid and attendance does matter if you have a loved one who's going to be in an assisted living facility and they were in the armed forces during a combat period. So again, if they served and these are designated periods. So if they were a Green Beret, but it was before technically the Vietnam War, they don't qualify. But if they were scrubbing dishes on an army base in Topeka, but it was during Vietnam, they qualify for aid and attendance. That's the main VA benefit that I'm dealing with. Will we be sending this as a recording? Yes, it's recorded every year. I've often thought about going back to see how much grayer my beard has gotten each year, because I think the first year we posted it, there was barely any gray, and now look at that. So the annuity doesn't count as an investment. That is community property. No, a Medicaid compliant annuity is how we move money around to help married couples qualify. Do transfers for reimbursing expenses count toward getting a penalty, as in the receipts? No. If you paid for a loved one's groceries, if you paid for the house to be redone, no, that doesn't count as a transfer. What I tell clients though is receipts and paying yourself back to the penny matters. If you say, boy, I really did a lot of work for mom the last few years, that felt like 20 grand to me, an alarm's gonna go off. But if you go through your receipts and you realize, oh boy, it looks like with the repairs to the house and the groceries and dealing with gas and all of that, it looks like mom owes me $21,000, $21,378.24. That's a valid reimbursement. Do donations to the Humane Society count as a transfer? Technically, yes, but we can argue around that. If you've made donations, what I usually do is I tell clients, once you've come to see me, let's not make donations. If you did in the past, that's okay. They probably won't tick you, but let's not get cute. How does the state look at assets such as properties held by an LLC owned by both spouses? If you own it, you own it. There is no trust or LLC or anything we can transfer property to shield resources. So remember, I talked about cash we can move around with a Medicaid compliant annuity. The house is always exempt for married couples. A second property, a vacation house, the cabin, up on the peninsula. There's no way to get that exempt and qualify for Medicaid. You can't put that property into an LLC because it's still yours. And if the LLC is owned by someone else, you've given the property away and transferred it. There's no way to own more than one piece of property and qualify for Medicaid. What if a child has moved into the home to care for mom, has lived there for 2 years, but is not a paid caregiver? A parent can transfer the house to the caregiver child. You don't have to be a paid caregiver. If you're in the house helping out and mom later goes on in-home care Medicaid, you can transfer the house to you. Is each state different in terms of requirements? God, yes. There are so many little differences between every single state. I live in Oregon. I do some Oregon estate planning. My mom was on Medicaid in Oregon. I don't do Oregon Medicaid work. There's too many little things around the edges that I could get wrong. There are gigantic differences between some states on the West Coast and the East Coast. I once had a consultation with a client's child. The client had moved their parent to Washington. They were in New York State. I was on the phone with this client's child and the client's child's attorney back in New York State. And when I was explaining to the New York attorney, they said, "What about this?" I said, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "What about this?" And I said, "No, you can't do that." The attorney almost started getting hostile with me of like, "What do you mean you can't do that?" Like I almost got in an argument. I remember sitting here in this chair on the phone with that attorney, and they were getting hostile with me. And I had to explain to them, "Look, I'm sorry, this isn't New York. We can't do that in Washington. Every state is different." If you move your out-of-state parent to Washington, we're dealing with Washington rules. So if you have a parent in Arizona or Montana or New York or Colorado, I can't tell you what's going on in Arizona or New York or Colorado. I can only tell you what's going on here. Money paid to a child with power of attorney expenses. My mom lives in a different state with her husband, but as her POA, you have to travel. A stipend is not something I'd recommend. You can be repaid for your expenses, but a stipend, that feels like a gift to me. Now, if you're local or you've moved a parent in, you can be paid as a caregiver. But a stipend and travel expenses, I don't know about a stipend. Theoretically, if you're serving as an agent, and I'm answering this question right here, I hope you can you guys see the questions, Lynn, that I'm
I can
answering?
see the questions.
Good. So this question I'm looking at right here from Caitlin, that's a tricky one, Caitlin. As an agent, technically, you can reimburse yourself for the time you served, but that's an hourly reimbursement at a reasonable rate based on time performed. So I see the word stipend, and that instantly gives me the heebie-jeebies. Reimbursing yourself for travel expenses, totally allowed. I had a case and an example I use of reimbursing yourself. I had a client who had mom reimburse her travel costs. Not only that, we were able to argue with the state. This person, we were also able to have them reimburse this person's friend's travel costs. To use one of my favorite phrases, this client's mother was a difficult person to love. There was a lot of trauma there. And my client basically not only did mom reimburse her plane ticket, she reimbursed this person's best friend's plane ticket because this woman couldn't deal with dealing with anything with her mother without her best friend there. And so, as I put it, we got a reimbursement for an emotional support human. If you have a reasonable explanation and you have the bills, you can be reimbursed. But things like a stipend or I helped mom out a lot, that feels like 5 grand. To quote my old accountant, pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. Thank you, Joshua, for supporting our local newspaper, The Columbian. You're welcome, Liz. I love The Columbian. I don't get a free subscription, even though I pay them a ton of money, but I'm still happy to support them. Can a spouse transfer the home to themselves if they have the POA? Nonstop. I do that all the time. Again, that was my 2 o'clock today. And I drafted the deed up. Wife signed and wife as agent for husband signed. This is why you need a power of attorney. If you don't have a power of attorney, get one yesterday. And most importantly, for Alzheimer's and dementia purposes, if you never drafted any powers of attorney, You need to sign documents and move money around, and that loved one has dementia, they probably can't sign a power of attorney, and you're looking at a guardianship. Everyone on this Zoom, if you're over the age of 18 and you still have capacity, draft a power of attorney. Even if it's not with me, draft a power of attorney. If you don't have a power of attorney and you need to do Medicaid planning, I hate to say it, I'm giving you the name of a guardianship attorney. Sarah, you do not always learn something new. You know as much as me. Sarah is a placement advisor. She's one of the stack of cards I'm giving you. I have Sarah Sheets' phone number in my phone, so if I need to text Sarah a quick question when I'm seeing a client, I know I can text Sarah and she'll text back. If you live at home to care for mom and you're not getting paid, can you reimbursed? Can you be reimbursed for paying adult babysitters from time to time? Certainly you can. Oh, by the way, and another, I should probably add this because I added this, a couple days ago. Another one of my platitudes about placing people in home care for Alzheimer's and dementia. I'm of the opinion it's like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. I believe if you have someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, yes, while we're in a holding pattern trying to figure out what the heck to do, sure, let's pay for some adult babysitters. But generally, I advise unless you plan on keeping someone in the house for forever, you should be looking at placing them. Can you be reimbursed for the cost to get a guardianship? Yes, you can. I used to do guardianships. I don't anymore. People occasionally call me for guardianships. Guardianships are involved in Alzheimer's and dementia care and Medicaid planning because if you have a loved one who has severe Alzheimer's or dementia, they don't have the capacity to sign a power of attorney. And if you need the legal right to manage their affairs, to move money around, to apply for Medicaid, you're looking at a guardianship. Oh, good. I referred you. Is that Laura Mancuso? I hope you're going to be typing the follow-up, Bernadette. Yes, Laura is great. Hooray. Thank you for replying. I refer guardianships to Guardianship Law Group. There's three female attorneys. You can go with Rachel. You could go with Laura. You could go with Marisha. They're all great. Better them than me. I don't miss guardianships. Yes, I'll help you with the Medicaid application. Medicaid applications, they are part of what I do. I do tell clients, and this is another, by the way, I don't know if this would fit in the platitudes. Medicaid, applying for Medicaid. Medicaid is not a program where they're designed to screw you over and arbitrarily deny you. Medicaid is a program where it's frustrating and you may feel helpless and you may feel like they're out to get you, but they are not. You do not need an attorney to apply for Medicaid. Clients choose to hire me and pay me because they don't want to do it. They're emotionally drained. They just don't want to do it. You don't need to pay an attorney to apply for Medicaid. You can do it yourself. The example I give, and this might be more expensive than getting your oil changed, but I say applying for Medicaid is like getting your oil changed. You could watch a video on YouTube and you could go down to O'Reilly Auto Parts and you could try and figure out how to change the oil in your car yourself. Or you could go down to Oil Can Henry's and say, here's some money, let me know when you're done. And I tell clients that, hiring an attorney to apply for Medicaid, it doesn't mean you can't do it yourself. You can get under the car and change the oil, but some people find benefit in here's some money, let me know when you're done. Travel to come help in paying for house repairs, keeping for expenses, but wouldn't ask for reimbursement until he needs Medicaid. That is a useful approach if there isn't cash on hand to be reimbursed. As an example, when that comes up a lot, and I'm looking at a question from Haley here. A lot of people pay out of pocket for home repairs because mom has a house but doesn't have much cash and they can't really be reimbursed until the house sells. The state is okay with that. But you have to make clear to yourself, to your mother, even if she doesn't have capacity, just jot down notes somewhere that you're going to be keeping track of expenses and you're going to be asking for reimbursement when the house sells. Um, the state understands that you're not doing this. I'm not saying this derisively because I don't know this Haley Lewis, but the state knows you're not giving mom this money to travel and pay for the house out of the goodness of your heart, that you expect to be reimbursed because you don't want to waste this money. There's nothing wrong with that approach. That being said, if your dad has cash and he's able to reimburse you, let him reimburse you. I only advise paying out of pocket and then reimbursing yourself when the person who you're helping out doesn't have cash to pay for it themselves. You can reimburse yourself for travel, of course. If dad in this situation has money for house repairs, use dad's money. It's just easier. But if dad doesn't have money, you can pay and be reimbursed. Uh, Need to go back to reality caregiving, boy. Again, as I was saying, this is another platitude because we have a couple extra minutes. Uh, I understand how difficult it is. I'm on the backside now. It's hard to believe it's been this long. It again, my dad passed away almost 5 years ago, and I remember, when I when I got the news, my dad was, when we pulled the plug on my dad, the first call I made when I got home after I'd called my wife, before I even called my therapist, was I called Lynn Crawford. And I said, Lynn, what do I do? So I tell everyone, thank yourselves for going to Hope and caring for yourselves. My dad's been gone almost 5 years. My mom was in an adult family home for 61 months with Alzheimer's. She finally passed in October. The reason why I do Medicaid, the reason why I do elder law, I always tell people what I like about elder law is it's the only area of law where you can make a buck and make a difference. And it really is nice. All of you caring for your loved ones. I know how hard it is. And I appreciate the effort you make to care for your loved ones without getting schmaltzy.
Well, you didn't think I was going to let you off that easy, did you?
What?
Well, I have a few more questions,
Okay.
basic Medicaid questions.
Okay.
So,
Please.
where and how do we apply?
I advise clients a lot of times see me in a consultation, and if I say you don't need me, there is an online portal you can apply for Medicaid.
So, I have to tell you that I have done that for several family members,
I bet you have.
and it really is not as hard as people might think.
They're not out to screw you over.
And I think that's a really important thing that, there are rules, but they're not out to screw you over. I
No.
figured that out.
Yes.
So what documents do you need if you're getting ready to do this?
Yeah, records of income, gross income, bank statements, titles to cars. A big thing, if someone sold a house in the last 5 years, the settlement statement. Basically, what you have to show is where money went and what you did with it.
And how long does approval take?
Knock on wood, 45 to 60 days. But the problem is the state, and again, they're not doing it to screw you over, which is the frustrating thing I explain to clients. But if there's all sorts of money being moved, they have what's called an AVS report, Asset Verification System. And this AVS report basically has a little ping each time there's a large amount of money moved. So if they see, oh, October 2024, it looks like $7,000 went from account A to account B, or went out of account A. Can you show me where that money went? I see in account B, there was a withdrawal of 5 grand in, September 2022. Where'd that money go? That's the paperwork that holds applications up. It's not that they think you didn't, that you did something. It's just they have to get a verification of tell me about this money and where it went.
So what
That's what causes applications to go long.
common mistakes that we should avoid?
Uh, Giving a lot of money away.
And then what happens if there's a sudden change in income? For example, I can think of something that happened in my family that suddenly somebody who was paying off some property over time suddenly paid it all at once.
Oh, is that's not income. So they were paying down a mortgage.
Yeah, yeah.
It was their more. They can spend their money on themselves in any way they want. If I have someone who's over that $72,000 resource limit, a married couple, the first question I have, do you owe any money on your mortgage? The home is always an exempt resource. You can spend your money on yourself in any way you want. Why keep spending money on this interest to pay off the mortgage?
So what happens if we move or change living arrangements for whatever reason?
I need to know what the context is. I would
I'm
say
s-
I generally tell clients the house is an exempt resource, cash isn't. If you're thinking of moving or downsizing, wait till your loved one's on Medicaid, then sell the house and pocket the money.
what support is available if coverage is denied or reduced for whatever reason?
So if they're reducing coverage, it's only based on income. You'll always, theoretically, you should not be paying out of pocket. You can always appeal a decision. There are all sorts of reasons you can appeal. And and I tell clients for a lot of little things, meaning I think I should be entitled to keep more money per month, or I don't think they got that calculation right. A lot of times it wouldn't be cost effective to pay an attorney to guide you through what's called an administrative hearing. You always have the right to appeal. You always have the right to have your case heard by an administrative law judge. And I tell you, more times than you think, someone without a lawyer will say, "Hey, I think the state screwed this up and I think I'm entitled to this or that." And the administrative law judge will say, "You know what? I think you're right." So if you're denied, you can always either contact an attorney or you're always welcome to appeal. A lot of clients come see me, and I have noticed, by the way, the vast majority, keyword, so fingers crossed, knock on wood, the vast majority of times people are denied, it's because there was some sort of massive miscommunication of an easily resolvable issue. I would say post-COVID that the caseworkers who were grumpy old men and ladies who were denying people or being confusing or obfuscating for no good reason tended to retire around COVID. I do occasionally have caseworkers who are a little flaky, but I haven't had to deal with anyone malicious in years. There was one wicked witch I had to deal with a couple times, but she's been retired for a few years.
Is there a difference between medical Medicaid and long-term care Medicaid?
Ah, so this is a confusing one. Some clients come to see me say I need help with Medicaid. Confusingly, what we would call Obamacare, which is state subsidized health care, is also called Medicaid. That is what some people call medical Medicaid. That's a totally unrelated program. If you have a loved one who's going to be going to a facility and their care costs exceed their income and resources, we're talking about long-term care Medicaid.
Okay. And what happens if you have a loved one in a facility on Medicaid and the facility changes hands
Yeah.
and suddenly no more Medicaid?
I wish there was a better way to put it than you're screwed, but the answer is you're probably screwed. And that's why I always advise clients to contact a facility placement advisor. I'm not, again, I just said Sarah Sheets is great. So I'll say I could hypothetically call up the Sarah Sheetses of the world. I had this happen once with, I'll say it was Sarah, but I had a client who was going to an assisted living facility. Yeah, then you'd have to deal with the private pay again. I had a client who was going to look at an assisted living facility. The name didn't ring a bell. You've heard of these places, Cherrywood and Bridgewood, and all the different places out there. And I called Sarah and said, "Sarah, what do you think about this place?" And she said, "Don't go there." Unfortunately, though, there are not protections in place for that. And this is what really messes clients up more than anything, Lynn. It's not the place changing hands, though that does happen. This is a personal bias. I tend to find that the smaller mom and pop adult family homes, you can take them for their word, and the larger corporate run assisted living facilities, I wouldn't take I'd trust them as far as I could throw them. And so a lot of clients, they should be in an adult family home. They probably don't have enough money for an assisted living facility's 2-year private pay period. And the assisted living facility guy giving them the tour, Josh, says, "Oh, listen, usually we require 2 years out of pocket, but if something comes up and you run out of money, I'm sure we can come up with something." And a year later, you run out of money and you call this assisted living facility and they say, "We're sorry, but our written policy is 2 years and Josh doesn't work here anymore." I'm not saying that's every assisted living facility, but I am saying there is the chance you get screwed, which is why I do not advise finding an assisted living facility or adult family home yourself. Hire a placement advisor to help you find something.
So if something like this happens, are the adult children then financially responsible?
If they can't find something, someone's responsible.
And so they basically they throw them out.
Yeah,
And so it's up to whoever is responsible for them to find a spot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I had to deal with a client who called me today. It's a assisted living facility, and I was surprised. I don't remember the name. We didn't even discuss the name, but they're attempting a hospital dump. His mom had been in this facility for years, more than two, ended up in the hospital. But now that she's about to run out of money, all of a sudden it's, oh, I'm not sure we can take her back. That's called a hospital dump.
You say that's against the law.
Well, Lynn, it's against the law, but try telling that, which is why, what did I tell this client? Call the adult long-term care ombudsman.
Hmm.
I said, get off the phone. He said, I'm meeting with them in an hour. I said, hang up with me, call this number before you go into that meeting. Now, in terms of, getting screwed over with private pay periods, that happens. But hospital dumps, as Lynn and I just discussed, there is a program called the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program where they can assist you if you've satisfied their private pay period, you've done what the contract says, and they're still getting screwy with you. Another reason, per Sarah's note here, what's another reason I like adult family homes? This was just, again, my subjective experience. When my parents were at Cherrywood Village, which is what the name of the place was in Portland, I felt like every time I called, I was talking to somebody new. I don't know if anyone else has had to deal with this. But I felt like first I'd get a call from Lynn, who was the junior vice president of senior living, and then the next time I'd get a call from Julie, who was the junior executive vice president of senior development, and I just had no idea what the chain of command was. When I got my mom moved to an adult family home, my mom's caregiver was Leah, and I could text Leah, and I could call Leah, and Leah would send me photos of my mom. And again, I just find you get more bang for your buck from an adult family home, subjectively.
I have to change the subject.
Yes, but go
To
ahead.
talk about estate recovery. What does that apply to?
That applies to if someone's on Medicaid and they still have a house in their name.
Okay.
This comes up most frequently with people who don't see an attorney, qualify for Medicaid, they're a married couple, and they don't take the ill spouse's name off the title to the house.
Okay. Are there exemptions or hardship waivers?
If you have money, no. You've got to pay to play. Early in my career, I had a guardianship case where this person didn't have any kids we could find. Quote unquote step grandkids were caring for him, but they really just robbed him blind and they practically dumped him on the doorstep of this adult family home like you leave a baby, in a basket at the fire station. And sure, there were all sorts of things the state could have looked at, but this person was broke. They'd been taken advantage of. The state granted him a hardship waiver and got him on Medicaid. Um, if there's financial exploitation, the state will often grant a hardship waiver. So if anyone lost a lot of money due to like an online girlfriend or boyfriend scam, the state's not going to give you a transfer penalty because you gave a lot of money to some, girlfriend in Croatia. That's when hardship exemptions come up.
Okay. And does Medicaid recover costs from the home?
From the house you own, yes.
Right.
So here's how it works. Here's when estate recovery comes up most often that it could be avoided. Husband and wife own the house. Husband goes into an adult family home. Wife doesn't do anything about the house. Title is still owned jointly between husband and wife. They won't throw wife out of the house. They will put a lien on the house. And when the wife sells or when wife passes away, they'll wait. The state can recover up to half the proceeds of the sale of the house because it was still in husband's name. If you're a married couple and you're going to be going into an adult family home or assisted living facility and Medicaid's on the horizon, see an attorney, do something about the house. That
So
was my,
would
again, that was my 2 o'clock today.
the expectation then of if the home goes to remaining family, is the expectation that the house be sold to cover the expenses to Medicaid to the state?
Yes. So all of this come up a lot of and this is the bad news I have to give clients of, grandma's will said that the house was supposed to go to me. And the answer is, but the house isn't going to go to you because it won't be there. It doesn't matter who it's supposed to go to, the state can put a lien on it.
Okay. At what point should an elder law attorney be involved?
The nice way I put it is a precipitating event. I tell clients I can't really do much. Occasionally, I'll say about once or twice a year, I'll get a well-meaning but naive couple who say, "Oh, we've recently retired. We're in great health," and they look like a stock photo. You know how you look at an assisted living facility and they have the stock photo of the
Yep.
happily you married. They look like that couple. They're happy and laughing and they're not falling apart yet. And I tell them, "You don't need me yet because I don't know when you'll get sick, so I can't do anything about moving around the money. I need a precipitating event." And that means I need the bad news of I need a stroke or a broken hip or an Alzheimer's and dementia diagnosis because I need to know when that bad thing's happening and how much it's going to cost.
Okay.
That's the precipitating event. Again, in this world's most morbid horse race, I can't tell
Mhm.
you how to place your bet until I know when the race is going to start.
One last question, and that is what are the most common reasons that applications for Medicaid are declined?
I wouldn't know because I make sure applications get approved.
Okay.
I would assume, again, I would assume the reason why applications are denied is people aren't able to follow up with the paperwork requests and take it seriously or get indignant or just are flaky.
Okay.
They're going to work with you. Now, occasionally, of course, there are cases with very when that's the most common reason, I'd assume, applications are denied. I occasionally have cases that are denied because it's a unique area or concept or a unique point of law, and it's where we expect the denial because we're going to have to put this in front of an administrative law judge and sort out what's going on. As an example, just so all of you know, as an example of an application I expect might be denied, I have a case coming up where we're arguing over the definition of house.
Oh my goodness.
Don't ask. I can't divulge confidential information, but involves the definition of house. Um,
Interesting.
I have one more question because this is important. I want to answer. Bernadette McAllister, tell me what you mean by a springing power of attorney. Do you mean a power of attorney effective immediately, or do you need a doctor's note? I'm waiting for Bernadette to type here.
Yeah.
No pressure, Bernadette. A power of attorney question and something I discuss all the time while we wait for Bernadette to type. No pressure, Bernadette. Don't draft a power of attorney that's effective when the person becomes incapacitated. As an example, I had a client came to see me. This is the perfect example. Client came to see me 3 weeks ago. He didn't realize his aunt lives up near Bellingham in Mount Vernon, and his aunt is a mess. And she had no clue what was going on, and she's belligerent and in denial and horrible sundowners, the worst you could imagine. And her water got turned off, and her power of attorney is effective upon incapacity. And the client said, "What do I do? I'm power of attorney." And the answer is, you don't do anything until you get a doctor's note. So then you can submit that to the water company and get the water turned back on. That's the worst example. There's two reasons why powers of attorney effective upon incapacity are horrible. First of all, someone's horribly incapacitated. They need help yesterday. And the power of attorney says we can't do anything until a doctor's note. And I have to tell the client, come back next month when you have the doctor's note. Second of all, every single power of attorney I draft I think the last time I told a client, you know what, and a doctor determines who's incapacitated or a nurse or whoever. Um, About, gosh, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't want to argue with a client. I said, okay, effective upon incapacity. I've put my foot down now. If you want a power of attorney effective upon incapacity, I can't draft it. Because A, when you need help and you're incapacitated, we don't want to have to wait. Second of all, the example I give, my parents tried to go on one last cruise when my mom was getting sick, and they weren't able to do it because my mom was too sick. And thank God my parents bought trip insurance. But in order for the trip insurance to kick in, you had to upload a document to an online portal from a doctor verifying you weren't able to go. Telling my parents to upload a document to an online portal, you might as well have said to them, do me a favor, build a rocket and fly to the moon while you're at it. They
Mhm.
forget it. So I said, this is ridiculous. You guys, I have powers of attorney for you. They're effective immediately. I'm going to do, don't stop this. I submitted my powers of attorney effective immediately. I uploaded the documents to the online portal. My parents got the money. What's another bad reason why you shouldn't have a power of attorney effective upon incapacity? Even if you don't have Alzheimer's or dementia, as you get older, the world is going to start slowing down. A power of attorney effective immediately doesn't mean you're unable to do anything or can't do something or have no right. It just means whenever someone needs help, you can help them. My dad at 88 wasn't as on the ball technologically as he could be. With a power of attorney effective immediately, it meant if Pop needed help, I could help him. As an example, his dentist was near my house, and I would go on walks and I would swing by and say, "Hey, do you have my dad in the books for that cleanup? I know I thought he had something." And they said, "Oh, we thought he was going to call, but he didn't call." And I'd say, "Do me a favor, could you put him in for, the 13th at 2 o'clock?" And they'd put him in on the 13th at 2 o'clock because I could make that appointment for him. That's why you have a power of attorney. My own power of attorney is effective immediately. Doesn't mean my wife can do anything drastic. It just means whenever I need help, she can help me.
Perfect.
You're
So
welcome.
the question about who determines if someone is incapacitated.
Depends on what the power of attorney says. Theoretically, you could draft a power of attorney that says, I need the president to declare me incapacitated. Depends what the power of attorney says.
Well, let me give you an example that we would frequently use in the hospital
Yes.
to help nurses understand the difference between capacity and competence. And that would be that a physician or a nurse practitioner can determine capacity, but it takes a judge to determine competence.
Yes. Yes, and this is capacity or incapacity.
So there we go.
There you go.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been awesome.
It's always my pleasure.
I also have one last thing here that says thank you tons and a huge gratitude to Becky Martin in Southern Oregon, who runs the Hope group there.
Is there a
And
Hope group in Southern Oregon now?
in Ashland, there has been for
Oh,
some time. So is that
I
pretty cool?
listen, if I had time, I'd love to be a facilitator.
And we would let you.
Yeah, I've got 19 years to go. Oh,
Okay.
and I always remind after my mom passed away, I did a little what do you got session for for Julie's Thursday at 10 o'clock support group, which was my own version of kind of like, therapy after
Yep.
my mom passed. For
Yep.
any group facilitators, if you need somebody, I'm always available for a free what I call it what do you got session. I'm happy to sit and talk about legal mumbo jumbo for 2 hours to any Hope group that needs me.
That's pretty awesome. You should be sorry that you said that because you may be getting a lot of
I
requests here.
it, you know it gets me energized. Sometimes it's hard and boring when you're sitting there in the office, just going, listening to people drone on, and you think, why am I doing this? But going to a Hope group, it always, to use my dad's word, to use the Yiddish, it gives me such nachas. It gives me such nachas to give back because of how much Hope gave to my dad.
That's pretty awesome.
There you go.
So,
Happy to.
so Joshua, thank you so much.
My pleasure, everyone.
And thank you all for being here.
And thank you all for being here.
There have been a few questions about will they be able to see a recording, and that is absolutely so. When the recording comes out, I will send it to everybody who attended, but it will also be on our YouTube channel so that if you want to refer someone to that information, all you have to do is to go to the Hope Dementia Support YouTube. And it's usually will be ready by around Friday.
Again, and you can go year by year and see how much more gray my beard's
That's
gotten
right.
over the
We
years.
can.
That's right.
Now I'm going to
Yeah.
have to go look.
You can watch me age in real time.
So thank you all for being here and
Thank you, Lynn and Julie, and thank you, everyone.
take care.